We're going to do another late gestation ration today. This one includes alfalfa hay and a grain mix. If you'll remember, on the previous recording, we used corn silage, ground ear corn mixture, and alfalfa hay. Would be for the same stage of production as this one today. I believe that this one is more applicable to most of our producers. They will be feeding, or you will be feeding, hay and some concentrate or grain, or a grain alone, or a grain mixture, versus feeding corn silage and ground ear corn. So this one is probably more applicable. And we could substitute for the alfalfa hay orchard grass hay or other grass hays that were high quality. They have to be high quality, and we'll see some of that here today, I think. We can't feed mature, or we wouldn't recommend feeding mature grass hays to gestating ewes in the last 28 days of pregnancy. The main reason is this, is that they can't eat enough. They don't have enough room in their digestive tract to consume enough of the low quality hays to meet the requirements of their own bodies and the fetuses that are growing within. So would point out, we're using alfalfa hay here. If we're going to use a grass hay or a grass legume hay, it should be high quality. Then the grain mix that we're looking at on this slide is that this one basically contains 80% ground cracked corn and 20% protein pellet. The protein pellet is about 40% crude protein, and we'll see on the next in another slide the composition of that. I'd like to point out here a thumb rule for late gestation rations for pregnant ewes. 3 pounds of hay is about all they're going to eat for a 150-pound ewe, an average weight ewe, and 1 pound to 1.5 pounds of concentrate. Again, the concentrate could be the grain mix, or it could be shell corn or some other grain. 1 pound to 1.5 pounds of that, along with 3 pounds of hay, is about all these ewes will consume in a day, regardless of the quality of feed that you're feeding. There's just not enough room in the digestive tract. Again, if they're carrying twin lambs in the reproductive tract, they don't have enough room in the digestive tract to handle any more feed. Then the last thing here is the complete mineral mix is provided ad lib. In this particular case, the grain mix does have some minerals in it, so the grain mix that we're providing ad lib is just extra in case the ewes do need that and they can go get it whenever they want to, in addition to what they're consuming with the grain mix. The chemical composition, as we're looking at here, the alfalfa hay is basically about 90% dry matter. It is high in protein, relatively high, I guess, 18%. Alfalfa can be much higher than that, or it can be somewhat lower than that. It is providing 61% TDN, and the point I'd make here is comparing the alfalfa hay and the grain mix, or the concentrate that we're feeding. They're about the same as far as percent dry matter, but look at the difference in the crude protein content. The alfalfa hay is fed for protein. The grain mix is fed for energy. It only has 13.75% crude protein. Most of that grain mix is made up of corn, which is low in crude protein. But when we look at the TDN, or the energy content, the grain mix has much higher energy content, or TDN content, than does the alfalfa hay. That's expressed in the digestible energy as well. And then anytime we're feeding a roughage like alfalfa hay, we're going to find lots of calcium and minimum amount of phosphorus and a tremendous amount of vitamin A. And when we compare that with the grain mix, you can see that even though the grain mix contains a little bit more calcium than phosphorus, still it's relatively low. And the vitamin A activity is lower as well. As far as the footnotes on this particular slide, remember that all the ration composition is expressed on a 100% dry matter basis, and all the requirements, as we're going to see in a second, will be 100% dry matter basis. A kilogram of TDNs equal to 4.4 megacals of DE. We may remember this from the previous recording. And the alfalfa hay in this case is average to slightly above average mid bloom stage. Now here's the grain mix that I was referring to a while ago. It's composed of ground cracked shell corn, soybean meal, distillers dried grains, extra, or the mineral that is in here that they get every day, in addition to what they might want to pick up in the ad libitum access that we talked about a minute ago. And ammonium chloride is put in here. This is primarily to prevent urinary calculi in males and wethers. And so in this particular case, to be on the safe side, I put it in here for any sex, all sexes of sheep should receive the ammonium chloride at this level. And then vitamin E plus another vitamin A, D, and E premix. Nutrient requirements for ewes of different weights. During the last 4 weeks of gestation, expecting basically twins, 180 to 225% lambing rate, is listed in the daily nutrient requirements of sheep table. This is the one we used extensively in our previous recording. It's got all the numbers on it. It is table 6, entitled Nutrient Requirements for Sheep. And we use this table to determine the nutrient requirements of pregnant ewes and other ewes and other sheep as well. They're based on the weights of the ewes, as we said, and they're in moderate body condition, 2.0 to 3.0, somewhere in that range, when they're non-lactating and non-pregnant. That's when we would determine the weights of these ewes, not when they're getting ready to lamb. This is when they're non-lactating and non-pregnant. So in that case, if you have an average weight of a flock of ewes is between 154 and 176 pounds, you can calculate the ration based on the requirements for the weight that is closest to the average. Example, if ewes weigh an average of 160 pounds, we would calculate the requirements and their rations based on 154 pound weight. If they weigh 170, that's closer to the 176. Instead of extrapolating specifically so many units between these two weights, 154 and 176, we just decide that if they weigh 170 pounds, we'd calculate the ration for 176 pound ewe. They weighed 160 pounds, 161 pounds, or 162 pounds, then it would be for 154 pound ewe. So this is going to go through the same process that we did in the previous recording. 25 ewes that are non-lactating and open, and we found that they weigh 162 pounds, not 154 or 176, but 162 pounds. So then we have to determine the pounds of daily feed, dry matter, protein, and TDN. And we go to our nutrient requirement table and read down until we get the ewes in late gestation, expecting 180 to 225% lamb rate, and 154 pound ewe, because 162 pounds is closer to 154 than it is 176. And we find that they need 4.7 pounds of feed, 4.2 pounds of dry matter, 0.47 pounds crude protein, and 2.8 pounds TDN. We can find those in those numbers in that table. That's got all excessive amount of numbers in it. We have to do some math work too. We have to determine kilograms of these components: daily feed, dry matter, protein, TDN, then and mega cows, we have to get that, of DE, grams of calcium, grams of phosphorus, and international units of vitamin A. Again, for 162 pound ewes. So we've already been in the table and found that these 162 pound ewes need 4.7 pounds of daily feed. Divide that by 2.2 pounds per kilogram, then she needs 2.14 kilograms of feed. We determined from the table 4.2 pounds of dry matter divided by 2.2 gets you to 191. Same way with crude protein and the same way with TDN. Then we go back to the table 6, and look up the daily digestible energy, and we find it's 5.4 megacals per ewe per day for a 154 pound ewe, even though our ewes in this example weigh 162 pounds. Look under the calcium column, 7.6 grams, and phosphorus is 4.5 grams, and vitamin A is 5,950 international units per ewe per day. So we've extracted these numbers out of that table, and we will be using these to see if we meet the requirements, these requirements, when we calculate a ration here in a second. To begin, we have to first calculate the pounds of dry matter, crude protein, and TDN consumed per ewe per day. So the alfalfa hay, we're going to feed 3 pounds of alfalfa hay a day. And we go back and look, and we analyzed that, and we found that it was 90% dry matter. You can use 90% across the board and be pretty close without having to actually determine the dry matter. You can use a book value of 0.9 or 90% dry matter for hay and grain and so forth. So that's what I did in this case. It's 90% dry matter, and when we multiply that out, that ewe is going to consume, each ewe is going to consume 2.7 pounds of dry matter. We feed her a pound and a half of grain mix, and the book value for that would be 0.88, 88% dry matter. You could use 90% if you so desired, and you'd be really close. So I'd say 88 to 90 to 91 or 92% dry matter. Any of those values are going to be really, really close. So that comes out to, she gets 1.32 pounds of dry matter from that 1.5 pounds of grain mix that we put in a trough for. And then that totals 4.02 pounds of dry matter consumed per ewe per day. We have to use the dry matter. When we looked at the chemical composition of the hay and the grain mix, all of that is based on dry matter, 100% dry matter. So we found that hay contained 18% crude protein. Multiply that by the total amount of dry matter that 3 pounds of hay is going to provide, we get 0.49 pounds of crude protein. Go through the same process as far as grain mix is concerned. It was 13.75% crude protein on a 100% dry matter basis. Then we come to a total of 0.67 pounds of crude protein consumed per ewe per day. We do the same thing using the dry matter of the hay and the dry matter of the grain mix, 2.70 and 1.32. And the hay contains 61% TDN. The grain mix contained 82.2%. Calculate those out, we get a total of 2.73 pounds of TDN consumed per day. And we're going over this pretty fast because we've done that in the previous recording, so I think everybody would be in sync here with us. Now we have to go to kilograms. 4.02 pounds of dry matter that we just discovered she consumes divided by 2.2 pounds per kilogram gives us 1.82 kilograms of dry matter. Then 0.67 divided by 2.2 gives you kilograms of crude protein, the same thing on TDN. Now, the 1.24 kilograms of TDN, we have to convert that to megacals of DE if we want to look at the digestible energy. So we take the 1.24 kilograms of TDN, multiply by 4.4 megacals per kilogram of TDN gives us 5.46 megacals of DE consumed per U per day. Now we do calcium, still using the dry matter, total dry matter provided by the hay and total dry matter provided by the grain mix, multiplied by the percent calcium in the hay and the percent calcium in the grain mix on a 100% dry matter basis. So we get such small amounts of, in pounds, of calcium that is provided. Calculate in pounds first, then we multiply it by 454 grams in a pound. That means we're going to get 15.94 grams of calcium. Those numbers are a little easier to handle, I think, than the 0.0351 and the 0.0079. So that each of those ewes in a 25 ewe flock, and feeding this ration, going to consume 19.5 grams of calcium per head per day. Go through the same process. The only difference is that we use different percentages for phosphorus. We go back to our table of chemical composition of the hay and grain mix, and we'll see that the hay contains a different amount of phosphorus than it does calcium, the same way with the grain mix. But we go through the same process of calculations using different numbers and come out with 5.09 grams of phosphorus per head per day. Obviously, we're not going to feed exactly 5.09. We don't care. This is just for calculations. So what she's going to get is basically 5 grams of phosphorus per head per day. Again, we use the dry matter and the grain mix. Now we have to convert the dry matter in the hay and the grain mix to kilograms, because if you look on the composition table and the requirement table, it's international units per kilogram, and that's per kilogram of dry matter. So we come out with 1.23 kilograms of dry matter from hay, and you got 60,000 international units. In the table, it says 60 times 1,000. So that means there's 60,000 international units per kilogram. Look at the massive amount of vitamin A that she's going to consume. It's going to be way over her requirement. Here's no problem. Do not worry about this. Vitamin A can be in excess, no question. And as a result, we don't have to worry about vitamin A requirements if we're feeding a nice, green, high quality hay. In this case, we're feeding alfalfa, was medium to high quality. So obviously it contained lots of vitamin A, or carotene, basically, that is converted to vitamin A as the animal consumes it, and it's in the digestive tract. Does the diet presently being fed 3 pounds of hay and 1.5 pounds of grain mix meet the requirements of the ewe, of all these 25 ewes? So we go back to the original table early on in this presentation, where she requires 4.2 pounds of dry matter, 0.47 pounds of crude protein, 2.8 pounds of TDN, and you can read across. We calculated that she consumed 4.02 pounds of dry matter out of this 3 pounds of hay and 1.5 pounds of grain mix. So to calculate the difference there, she's 1/1800ths of a pound short in dry matter. But let's not worry too much right now about that. Let's look across what else she consumed. She was way over as far as her protein is concerned, and that's okay. She will be over if you feed in high quality hay. She'll have excessive amount if you're eating high quality hay. As far as energy is concerned, or TDN, she's a tad bit short, 0.07 pounds, but she's okay as far as the digestible energy is concerned. Calcium, she's over, that's okay. And she's over phosphorus, and she's way over her requirements in vitamin A. So you look at this and say, does this diet presently meet the requirements of these ewes? Yes, it does, except for dry matter and TDN. Even, like I say, if the dry matter is low, but the nutrients are all okay, don't worry about adding more dry matter, because the dry matter is the material that carries all of these nutrients that we've calculated. TDN is a little bit low, but the DE is adequate. The digestible energy is a more complete measure of energy than the TDN. So right now, I'm going to leave it as it is. I say the ration is good and it'll meet her requirements. Even though there's a slight deficit as far as the TDN is concerned, DE is a better measure of the energy that's in the feedstuffs that the animal's going to use than is TDN. So let's leave it as it is. If you wanted to make up some difference, and I use this one as an example that we just calculated, if you wanted to provide some extra energy in the diet by increasing the TDN, how would you go about doing it? Maybe it's 0.2 of a pound short in TDN, or 0.3, or maybe she's short in crude protein. So how would you go about calculating how much of whichever feed stuff to use to make up that difference? In this case, we're short only in the TDN. So we're going to use grain mix to provide that. Because you go back and you look at the composition for TDN, for alfalfa hay and grain mix. Alfalfa hay, it was 82% TDN in the grain mix. So obviously, if we're short in energy, we're going to add the ingredient in the ration, and in this case, grain mix, that will be the most concentrated in that nutrient. So grain mix has more energy per unit of weight than does hay. So that's what we're going to use. So it's 0.07 of a pound TDN deficient. First thing we do is divide that by the percent TDN in the grain mix. That tells me that I need 0.085 pounds of grain mix TDN. That's the energy. But I have to then convert it back to an as-fed basis, because we're going to feed grain mix. We're not feeding TDN per se. So divide the 0.085 by 0.88. That means I need 0.096 pounds of grain mix, or 1/10 of a pound per head per day. I could add 1/10 of a pound of grain mix and meet her requirements specifically. And that's the way I would calculate how much of the as-fed stuff would be needed. So I can add 1/10 of a pound and meet it. Now to double check that, you could take 1.5 pounds that we're already feeding and add 1/10 of a pound more, gives us 1.6 pounds. We got to convert that to 100% dry matter basis. Multiply by 0.88. That means we have 1.41 pounds of grain mixed dry matter. Multiply that then by 0.82 or 82.2% TDN. You need 1.16 pounds of grain mix TDN. Add that to the hay. Our total then comes to 2.81 pounds of TDN consumed per day. I believe if you look at our requirements and our comparison that we've made with as far as the requirements and the consumed, we were 0.07 pounds of TDN short, and she needed a total of 2.80 pounds of TDN. In this case, if we added 1/10 of a pound of grain mix, we'd get 2.81 pounds of TDN, and that'd meet her requirements. This is the way that you would, the steps you would take in calculating how much of an as-fed ingredient in the ration that you need to add to what you're already feeding in order to get the ewes up to meet their requirements of that specific nutrient. Take a little practice to do this. I would encourage you to do some of that with your own ration. Okay. So, like we did on the previous ration, real quick, calculate the total pounds of alfalfa, hay, and grain mix required per day for 25 ewes. We're going to, in this case, we're using the original ration of 1.5 pounds grain mix and 3 pounds of hay. That means we're going to feed 75 pounds of hay, 37.5 pounds of grain mix to 25 ewes in a day. So if we added the 1/10 of a pound of grain mix, make it up to 1.6 pounds per head per day, times 25 ewes. I think that instead of the 37.5, I believe that would come out to be 40 pounds of the grain mix fed to these 25 ewes in a day, instead of the 37.5. So, but this is the original ration. If you want to change it to 1.6 pounds, then it would be up to 40 pounds per 25 ewes. So the hay, 3 pounds of hay, how much is it going to cost us per ewe per day? I just used the $200 a ton. That's equivalent to 10 cents a pound. So the hay would cost us, if we fed it 3 pounds a day, that'd be 30 cents a ewe per day. The grain mix, if we're feeding the original 1.5 pounds, that would be at $300 a ton. That's 15 cents a pound. So it would cost us 22.5 cents per ewe per day. Or if you want to add that extra 1/10 of a pound, make it 1.6 pounds, multiplied by 15 cents a pound. My calculation said it would be 24 cents per ewe per day. The 52.5 cents per ewe per day total versus 54 cents if we added another 1/10 of a pound of grain mix. And you could calculate, you folks can calculate that out and see how much more it would be if you fed 1.6 versus the 1.5 pounds. Now then we go see how much it costs to feed 25 ewes. 3 pounds of hay per head per day, $7.50. And you're feeding 1.5 pounds of grain mix per ewe per day, feeding 25 ewes. It's going to cost us $5.63, $13.13 a day for 25 ewes. Now, how long is the late gestation feeding period on average? 28 days. I wonder what it would cost us to feed 25 ewes for 28 days, this ration. 3 pounds of hay and 1.5 pounds of grain mix. Total of $367.64 for 28 days. Seems to me like that's pretty cheap. Now then, you could also, if you don't like the 1.5 pounds grain mix for this ration, you want to feed her 1.6 pounds at the same cost for the grain mix. That's $378 per 25 ewes for 28 days. So I would summarize this recording with 2 or 3 statements. First, we use thumb rules And you can use these, and they're very close to the actual for late gestation, the last 28 days of gestation, expecting twins from your ewes, about 3 pounds of hay, medium to high quality, and a pound to a pound and a half of a concentrate. The concentrate can be like a mixture of concentrates, like a grain mix. It could be individual grains. Shell corn is ideal. It's a benchmark. If you want to feed oats, or if you want to feed other grains, then you feed them according to their feeding value. Shell corn is at the top. And if you have to add some protein to your ration, then soybean meal would be the thing that would be most efficient to add to this gestation ration. We must feed according to these to the requirements in order for the ewe to grow the fetuses in her body so that they will be healthy and normal size when they're born. Plus, she has to start synthesizing milk once the lambs are born, and it is essential that we feed her appropriately in late gestation, so all this will occur immediately after the lambs are born. And the last thing is, can't feed low quality hays in late gestation. Can't. They will be dissatisfied with performance if we do it that way. I have one more short recording that I'll make, and it will be give you some other options as far as late gestation rations and some lactation rations as well that would be appropriate to be fed to produce hopefully maximum performance. And we'll do that in the next recording.